One question I get asked often is how we're supposed to know if a painting is done. This can be hard enough under normal circumstances, but especially when we're learning, it can feel like a tall order to decide whether it's smarter to move on to the next painting or try to work the current piece for all that it's worth. I think it's also especially hard when working on commissions and getting a painting ready for a client review. I find that this is when I seem to lose all innate sense of when a painting is finished. So if you encounter this too, I want you to know that you're not alone and that there is an easy way to tell if you are ready to stop work on a piece. I also get asked this a lot by students and understand why it's a question that many of us want help with. So, today I want to share the breakdown of how I know when a painting is done so that you can apply the same thinking to your work. To kick off, I need to talk a little bit about how I think about the entire painting process so that we understand how the finishing part of it fits in. When I start work on a painting, I'm constantly searching for the obvious. I want to find places in the painting that clearly need work, and I know exactly what the work is that needs being done. This may not sound like it has much to do with finishing, but it's important to get to a natural pausing point. In an ideal world, I stop work on a painting not because I've run out of time or I'm tired, although I definitely wouldn't recommend continuing to work on a piece once you're tired. But I stop because I don't know what else to do that's constructive, and I won't continue working on the painting just because. So I typically stop work on a painting when I, one, don't know what the obvious next step to work on is, or two, I find myself working mindlessly or touching the painting just to touch it. Usually, if I'm at this place, it just means my brain is a bit fried from painting for so long, and there's nothing I can force myself to do to fix it. I just need to honor that that's happening for a reason and take a break. But this doesn't mean the painting is finished, just that painting session. But if I get to this point and I think maybe the painting is finished, then we move on to the next step. Otherwise, after my break, I should just come back to the painting and figure out what needs to continue. But let's say I do think maybe the painting could be done. It doesn't mean I know that it's done. So I consider this to be a pause or a tentative finish. I may sign the work at this point if I know the signature wouldn't be covered up if I continued to work on the painting, but I'm not deciding I'm done quite yet. So I like to let the piece sit for at least a day at this stage. Now, if you work alla prima like I do, the paint will begin to dry, but there's probably not a huge difference between coming back to your piece a day later versus maybe a week later. But the duration of this pause really just depends on what works for you. For me, when I take a day, I am intentionally giving myself a break from the painting. And if I need a longer break, I will take it. My eye has been looking at this piece for so long that usually at this stage, I can no longer objectively tell if the piece needs more work. So I tend to let my eyes and brain reset. And again, I take as much time as I think that requires. I don't know that there's an objective moment when I can tell the reset has happened, but I don't think you necessarily have to know for sure, and I'll explain what that means. What I'm really looking for is to feel fresh when I look at the piece. Like I get to kind of look at it as if I'm looking at some other artist's work and not this piece that I've been slogging away on. I want the piece to give me impressions that maybe I couldn't see before. So after about a day, or perhaps as long as a week, I'll come back and look at the piece fresh, and I'm really asking myself two questions. The first is, what am I loving? What is my eye drawn to? And the second is there anything distracting or anything that's bothering me? Now, the more I paint, the easier it is for me to trust these judgments. But when in doubt, I might let the painting sit more. So I might kind of come to it make those initial judgments or let those impressions come to me, and then take another break and come back and see if those impressions remain the same. In the intervening time, it's important for me to look at other paintings, work on other projects, and do whatever I can to kind of distract my creative eye from this particular piece. Then, once I come back to the painting for a second time, I can compare notes. Do I still love the same things? Are the same things still bothering me, or do they still feel distracting? This is my primary indicator of what happens next and the first real test to figure out if I'm finished. Now, if I only see things I'm happy with, it means the painting is finished. Sure, if I scrutinized it enough or forced myself to just keep working, I may find things to tweak or polish, but I may also just ruin the piece, and I'd rather move on to the next project and continue learning and honing my craft through further iteration rather than trying to drive one particular painting into the ground in the name of perfection. So if this is you, when you look at one of your pieces, I am here to give you permission to finish that piece, to let it be done, to call it good enough. You are good enough. This painting was good enough. You don't have to make it perfect for people to love it. But what happens if you see something that you are repeatedly bothered by? Okay, well, then a few things can happen. So if I see something that isn't right with the painting, but I don't know what it is, it means that I either need to declare the piece the best I could have done right now and just move on, or the piece needs to continue to stay in timeout, as I like to put it, at least until I figure out what actually needs to happen to correct the thing that's bothering me. The last thing I want to do is jump in and just work for the sake of working and not actually have a game plan. That's a really great way to just put more paint on the painting without actually knowing that you're fixing anything. To that point, here's where I try to be as objective and clear as possible. Is it a single brushstroke that looks distracting and needs to be removed or softened? Is it an error in the proportions that needs to be corrected? Color that needs to be dialed back to become more subtle? It's not enough to say, I don't like the eyes, or the likeness feels off. I need to have a game plan of exactly what needs to happen on the canvas to get the painting to the finish line before I will let myself pick the brush back up. Okay, but what about the alternate scenario? If you can see that something isn't right with the painting and you know what it is, and you know how to fix it, you fix it. At this point, you kind of go back into the flowchart and reevaluate after that to figure out if that was it, and this painting gets to be finished. Or perhaps you know what it is that's wrong, but you don't know how to fix it. A mentor could really help here, or you could do studies or small experiments to test out a technical solution to whatever your problem is. Or if that just doesn't seem practical, you may just decide to let the piece be and again, move on to the next piece. There's always time to improve your craft. You don't have to be perfect right now. So to recap this thought process, I pause a piece when I realize that I'm no longer being thoughtful about the marks I'm putting down on the canvas. Next, I come back to the piece fresh and observe what I like and what might be distracting me. Oftentimes, things that were distracting me during the painting session no longer actually bother me on second thought, which is, I think, why we tend to overwork pieces, especially when we start to paint for too long of a session. I actually find that most of the time when I come back to a piece fresh, I like it a lot more than I thought, and I've learned that this is a really critical piece of letting myself paint loosely, because I'm just going to be more critical when I'm in the middle of the painting session, and I'm going to tighten things up. But if I set a really clear boundary around stopping at the appropriate point and giving myself a break, I tend to realize I like the piece and I feel like it's finished when it's much looser and earlier in the process. On the other hand, sometimes parts of the painting that weren't working before become a lot more clear in terms of how I need to address them. So at this stage, if I don't see anything that feels distracting, it means that I'm done. If I know there are parts of the painting that need more work and I know what the work is and how to execute it, I can return to the piece after a short break. If there are parts of the painting that need work and I know what that work is, but I don't know how to execute it, that may be a great opportunity to get feedback from an expert or to do studies to hone the techniques necessary to finish the piece. But if I know that something doesn't feel right, but I can't put my finger on what it is, that doesn't mean that I should just keep painting until I figure it out. Chances are, if you want to improve as efficiently as you can, you should just move on to the next piece rather than just feeling stuck and spinning your wheels on the current piece. I find that most of us as painters have been guilty of this phenomenon over and over, and the result for painters who love painting loosely is that their paintings start to feel overworked and muddy and tighter than they want, or they lose the energy that they had earlier in the painting. If this is you, I'd urge you to err on the side of giving yourself permission to be done with the painting and just move on to the next one. However, I know some painters have the opposite problem. Perhaps you move on before giving yourself a chance to truly identify and grapple with the problems in your painting. If this is you, I would really recommend slowing down and being more analytical about what's actually going wrong in the piece. And this means being really present and mindful with what you are doing. Now, this is really the topic for a whole nother video, so make sure you stay tuned for that because there is a whole system of how you can begin to be much more analytical and thoughtful about each brush stroke that you're putting down so that hopefully this doesn't happen to you. But in the meantime, I will say that if you tend to work quickly and cycle through paintings really rapidly, it might be worth asking yourself how much you're analyzing and being thoughtful about each brushstroke and identifying concrete factors that contribute to your painting success. At the end of the day, there's always a balance to be struck. Spending too much time getting one painting absolutely perfect usually means that we learn much more slowly than we could if we spent that time practicing our skills on new pieces and iterating as much as we can. But rushing through pieces without being thoughtful about what you're doing can mean that your hard work isn't really helping you improve. I think it's important to remember that, yes, for just about any of us, in another month or year or 10 years, we may be able to execute on a given painting with a lot more sophistication or success than we can today. But when we're that much improved, would we even be choosing to work on the kinds of paintings that we are right now? Perhaps we understand so much more about the subject or composition or lighting that we would have tackled an idea completely differently in the future than we would today. And more importantly, we have to be practicing in order to improve to that point that we want to be at in the future. And the most meaningful practice isn't usually in the overworking or the perfectionism that I think we can all tend towards sometimes. Now, one thing that I mentioned in the beginning of this video that I want to circle back to is commissions. So this whole process definitely applies to working on commissions, and I think it actually becomes a lot more important. I know for me, it's really easy for commissions to get too tight, and really putting in breaks and being very mindful of when I'm starting to work less thoughtfully than I'd like to, or if I feel like I'm getting too tight or I'm overworking something, it means that I really do need to pause, take a break, and come back to the piece. I ask myself all the same questions when I come back to the piece that I described in this video. And at the point where I do think the painting is finished, here's where the difference comes in. Because it's a commission, it is not necessarily finished. So this is the point at which I would send it to the client and present it as a tentative final, and ask for any feedback that they might have. One thing that I think it's really important to remember that the difference between painting a piece on commission and painting it on spec is that commissions are inherently a collaborative process. There might be some painters who say, I'm just going to make what I'm going to make, take it or leave it. But I think for most of us, we are willing to work with our clients and make sure that we're doing something that's equal parts our vision and theirs. And hopefully those really mesh together well and overlap meaningfully. Now, I think the thing that's important to note here is that what I do not do is let the client tell me when the piece is done. And by that, I mean I do not show the client a piece and present it as finished before I'm really happy with it. I think that's one of the really important things I wanted to drive home in this video, because I know that working on commissions is really different. Now, I'd say the rest of the commission process really has to do more with working with clients and being great at customer service rather than actually knowing if the piece is done. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off here. But if you would like a video talking about the commission process and how you can effectively create your own process that works really well for you, definitely let me know in the comments. Now, as far as this painting, what made this piece stand out to me so much was that I was willing to let this piece be loose, and that meant letting it be finished. There is such a strong correlation between letting the piece be done and achieving the looseness so many of us are seeking in our work. I love how this kitten has areas like her eyes that are rendered with a great deal of accuracy and care, and that lets other things like her fur become much more loose and less literal. If I kept painting on this for the sake of painting, or without knowing exactly what needed to be done, I probably would have started painting individual strokes of fur and losing the painterly quality I wanted so badly here. But knowing when to stop helped it become one of my favorite paintings. By the way, this kitten has an Instagram, which I will link in the description below in case you just want to enjoy how ridiculously cute she is. I know I really enjoyed it while making this paint. If you found this video helpful, I hope you'll give this video a thumbs up. If you'd like to find out more about how I use techniques like this one to master my style, I have a free style guide linked in the description box below. If you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and hit the bell icon so you know whenever new videos come out. And if you would like to see available paintings like this one, be sure to check out my website below. As always, thank you all for watching, and until next time, happy painting.